So let's think a little bit together about that whole concept of leadership and what it takes to lead a data initiative. Our chefs were concerned about what flavors to lead with and the balance that they needed to achieve in the dishes they were going to serve. How do you make sure you have the right leaders at the table?
That is a bit of a double-edged sword. Really what you're looking for in a data leader might be different than, again, in your application or in your program areas. You're looking for somebody with almost that exploratory mindset. How can I dive in and start to tune and figure things out? So another example in our environment, we have our prison institutions accredited. Just like a high school or a college is accredited, there's essentially a checklist. You go down the checklist and you can be accredited, you get a score. We've had a number of our prisons go through and be accredited with a score of 95, 98. We had one at 99% recently. And to Adam's point, you back up and you start to look at the outcomes that we generate, and a prison that scored 99 isn't producing better rehabilitation, isn't unifying an offender with their family better than an institution that scored 60%, or providing better health care or education or anything along those lines. So we were measuring the right, or not measuring the right things. Having a good leader, and some of the executives that I work with, I would put into this category, our secretary being the example, is able to step back from that, and it's not about the accreditation, it's not about having the gold sticker on the door. Are we doing the right things? Are we making the appropriate changes? He was willing to back off from those standard metrics and figure out programmatically, what do we need to change? What do we need to adjust to get to better outcomes? Not so we get a better report card from an accreditation agency, but so we're doing the right thing to get to the right outcomes for the citizens of California, for the offenders that we have in their system, and for their families on the outside. And so it's having somebody that has that willingness to look at that outcome and question, is that even the right outcome to be shooting for? Is this really the purpose that we're trying to achieve?
So let's flip that a little bit. If you're the one who's leading a data project, what makes you a good leader?
I mean, I do take it back to that purpose. Understand the core of what you're doing. Don't get caught up in this is a project and this is what we're doing, because if the core of your buy-in as a leader is that purpose that you're driving towards, that that end state goal, that gives you the flexibility to listen to your staff and understand what's actually going on and allow those changes in course to happen while you're still bought in as a leader. And with that listening, key component of communication, then you also become a conduit. Where do I need to help you, the team who's actually doing this, get past roadblocks? Where do I need to step in and have conversations? Who do I need to communicate this information to so that you can stay focused on the task at hand?
This is one of the areas where I know this conference is about data, but I would purport that this is actually one of the fatal flaws in the state system, is a lot of time we get so mission focused, so oriented on what we thought was the original goal, that we'll end up down a path where somebody should have raised their hand and said, we should have taken a left turn, or working on that goal is no longer pertinent because a policy changed, because something else has changed. That's one of the things, especially in data. Do a little bit, evaluate. It's that plan, do, evaluate, replan, do, evaluate. It's that cycle. Do a little bit, stand back, are we doing the right thing? And whether it's project management, data initiatives, that's one of the things I think we have to get better at as a state, as project people, as data people, frankly, as control agencies. Are we still doing the right thing and achieving the goals, and are the goals still worth achieving? Sometimes the answer to that is no, and the best answer is to stop doing what we're doing.
Great. So quantify and qualify barriers that you face, make sure that you're communicating along the way, making sure that your leaders are able to identify and quickly remove barriers for you when necessary. Great tips. So Adam, we talked You mentioned earlier in our first conversation the importance of governance. Let's drill down into that. Francois used a classical French approach to constructing his dish, and Polly was governed by her Southern roots. How important is governance structure in setting up a data initiative?
The vinaigrette. I don't act for a reason.
You just had to go there, didn't you?
To me, the governance is key from personal experience in the Health and Human Services Agency. Out of that open data effort that I mentioned, that grew into a governance structure because as they had the discussions about what they wanted to do, and they brought in some data leaders from a handful of other departments, that suddenly became a working group. And the working group was having the discussions, and the working group said, we want to bring more people into this. We need to loop agency in. And agency said, oh, this is great. We want to see this. Bring all of them in. And each step, we showed value in what was being done by Department of Public Health. And then Office of Statewide Planning and Health Development said that they wanted to do it too. And agency said, oh, that's great, right? And each step, you needed a new work group. You needed a little bit higher level of support. And all of a sudden, we had a governance structure. And a couple of years down the line, we have it for data, we have it for IT projects, we have an innovation subcommittee, right? And what it does is that creates the venue to answer the question of, who do I need to talk to about this? Where do I share this information? How do I go about standards, right? Somebody else has probably already categorized these things that I'm working on. Where do I ask? Now we've got a subcommittee. Everyone in the agency knows that's where you go to ask that question. And either somebody has an answer to help you out, which is great, now we've saved you time, or nobody does. And at that governance level, we can say, you're it. Develop what works for you, bring it to governance, and we'll vet it out for others to check, and suddenly you create the standard, right? And so it's this venue so that every single time we go down a data path, we don't have to redo that effort of building ties between departments and programs and projects. It's there, and it's an established part of the functionality of the agency as a whole. And a couple years into it, we're starting to see the benefits of that. And so a lot of times we feel like governance is this overhead bureaucracy. Why do I need to waste my time for this? We really deliberately set it up as governance is not compliance. Right? We are not setting rules for you to follow. We are collectively, as an agency, bringing the experts together who have to deal with these problems on a day-to-day basis and doing what's necessary to make your life easier to make those advancements and move it throughout the whole agency. And so it's really key the way you message what that governance is, but for Health and Human Services, it has been the game changer.
Great. So governance can be hard to implement, but it sounds like you found a great solution for doing that. What's the secret sauce for successful governance structure?
I think Adam already nailed that. Governance is not compliance, and it's an active process. How many of us have gone to steering committee meetings or governance meetings, and it's essentially just a glorified status report session where a project team or a person reports out to a panel of somewhat disinterested executives that are on their BlackBerries. Well, boy, I just dated myself.
Ouch, yeah.
On their iPads, doing something else when they should be actually listening and participating. Governance needs to be active. Governance is a place where you go in and say, these are the problems, these are the challenges we need to overcome. Here are some options, but I need the people on this committee to help me get there. I'll make a recommendation, but I need their authority, their decisiveness, their input to choose the right direction to go, whether that's a process or ownership or anything along those lines. So as an example, again, in the correctional system, when you're inside a prison, we have a group that we call case records. They are the keepers of information. They literally used to have files under lock and key. Now it's electronic, but it's still their data to be stewarded over. When we transition someone out under parole, we literally take them out of a prison environment and they're back in our communities. Well, one of the things we track are identifying marks, scars, marks, tattoos, things along those lines. Who gets to update those type of things? An offender gets a new tattoo, who puts it in their record? Well, organizationally, it has always been, it's case records that owns this file. Well, now they're in the community and they got a new tattoo. They're still under our supervision. Where does the parole agent note that? Well, they just put it in their notes. So if they reoffend and come back into prison, now case records has to do exactly the same work that the parole agent already did. So sometimes you take an issue like that to governance. We built a fairly large and expensive offender management system, and one of the barriers we had to break down was that cultural ownership. That's my data. No, that's our data. As an agency, and it doesn't matter whether the offender's inside the prison, outside the prison under our supervision, or frankly, even on community supervision, if information changes, we should be able to capture that one time and share it not only amongst ourselves, but in our case, we should be able to share that with the local police departments, with other organizations that are providing oversight to help prevent fraud, to help prevent a lot of things. And breaking down those barriers was part of the governance structure. We had to have executives who had always looked at that as mine, sit in a room and have a conversation around, I don't own that anymore. I'm a consumer of it. I might own it or be the steward of it for a period of time, but then when that offender transitions, I transition that responsibility to someone else, and I have to trust them to do it right. And that was one of the biggest things with governance, is having those people sit around a table and make eye contact and almost literally say, I trust you to do it. And when it comes back to me, I trust that it's correct. I'm not going to do it again. Because that's where efficiency comes in, that's where effectiveness comes in, and for the point of being able to mine that data, now I can trust all my constituent stakeholders to be contributing to that outcome rather than me having to do it all. We can leverage the good of many off the work that a lot of organizations have done and go much, much farther in that model.
And I think that that's key, that to me, governance is the difference between doing a use case where you get value around that use case, and that use case being an iterative step towards an enterprise that's driven by data, right? You can do any of those steps the Russ just talked about, and it's just an individual small win, and it provides value, but it doesn't necessarily build to, you do it through governance, you build trust, it becomes something that then follows and you create a structure around it. That doesn't happen if you don't talk about it with the other departments and agencies, right? It's just this one little use case. And that's I think, the key to how governance helps you get to an enterprise level of data success versus spinning your wheels for these small wins over and over and over again.
So how do you get to that level of maturity? How do you keep the organization informed? What techniques have you used to keep the organization informed about what you're doing with data?
We hope really hard. Oh, sorry, that's not the right answer.
But it is reality in
It
some
is reality.
instances.
At Health and Human Services, through governance, we have this data subcommittee. So for one, the existence of that says the agency believes this is important, and we are going to have people on top of their day jobs spend time as part of this active governance process, right, where they're doing initiatives. One of those initiatives that the data subcommittee took on was doing an annual data expo for the Health and Human Services Agency. And so every year they do a half day to a day-long session, depending on the year, where they bring in experts to talk about what are the trends, what are the things that are happening, to help build expertise throughout the agency, to talk about what we've been doing within the agency so that people get exposure to it, both to say, wow, this is great, I want to be a part of this, and so that people can hear, that sounds like it's related to what I'm doing. I should go to that subcommittee and talk about what we need. I should talk to my leadership to make sure that we know what's going on there. So that Data Expo, it's one day, a half-day thing, but it really sends the message that we believe that this is important throughout the agency.
Yeah, that's a great takeaway. Thank you for that. I think, am I right? Our time is just about up. Thank you for not all setting your timers and making sure we were staying exactly on time. But we do want to offer you the opportunity to ask these two gentlemen some of your questions based on some of the experiences that you're having. So we would welcome you now. If you have a question for them, raise your hand. We've got people out here with microphones. Anyone with a question for either Adam or Russ? There you go.
There you go.
My name is Richard. I'm from DMV. So one of the things you mentioned earlier is it's not my data, but it's our data. So at DMV, we have something called Data Resource Manager, who basically becomes the official manager who's responsible for that data. So, and a lot of our data have PII, much like your departments, both of your agencies as well. So how do you overcome the concerns that the deputy directors have because that data they're ultimately responsible for?
It's an uphill battle. A lot of it for us is backing away from the data and talking about the outcomes we're trying to get to. So in a prison system, we have a group that does rehabilitative programs and education. We have a group that does custody. We have groups that do health care. And if you think about it, all of those, they have to have the right information from which to work. In other words, I need to know this is Richard from DMV, and he's going to be with us for 4 years because of his sentence, and his education platform is this. But once they start to buy into being able to trust each other and know that it's organization data, not just mine, that I can actually relieve myself of some work if I can trust someone else to build the quality into their data, and frankly, to have a forum where I can bring up issues and deal with those, it starts to get that out, and you work through it. So we set up on one of our big initiatives, for example, what we call an advisory committee, which is the directors of all of those different lines of business. And it was intentionally a forum where they could come in and say, I need X, and I need to get that from the education group. And if I don't get that, my outcomes are impacted because I can't make the right decisions in a classification hearing that talks about privileges or something along those lines. So it was really helping them understand the why I need something. What's happened in our scenario in the past, a lot of times, we just put a demand on the table, I need your people to do this, without ever really saying why or what bad thing happens if I don't have that. Now, how do we work together to get it? And sometimes that conversation will move to a different point. I don't have the ability to do it because I don't have the starting point. And you find out that you have an expectation on someone else who really can't even fulfill that expectation because I haven't provided something in the first place, or another group hasn't provided something. So it's having a forum for that conversation so that it's not combative, but it's working to unify that purpose and figure out sometimes there's an order of the things. Sometimes you have to build the foundation for the house before you bother picking the roof shingle color. Mm-hmm. But in an individual division, they might be all about roof shingle color. It doesn't matter if I don't know what the shape of the house is or what kind of house it is, and do I even need shingles. So having a forum for those conversations is the big thing, and sometimes it's just time and making that investment, and frankly, picking off something that isn't horribly contentious to use as the first example that people can see that was successful. Now I can trust the process a little more. If you go right for the big meaty issue, frankly, you'll put people in corners and they'll start duking it out.
The one thing I'd add, we can talk more about this on the 21st for those who want to come. But the one thing I'd add is that in Health and Human Services, we worked through those conversations and got buy-in at the agency level to say the default needs to be that within our Health and Human Services family, we share our data. And so we had a work group of the attorneys and risk management folks who worked through a global data sharing agreement that every single department in the agency has signed on to, saying that this is the legal boilerplate, right? Because every department has their own, and that can add 6 months to a data sharing agreement to get them to come to agreement on that. We now have one for the entire agency. You're sharing it internally. This is your data sharing agreement. All you need to do now is spell out the specifics of which data you're sharing and what the purpose is. Still a lot of work, but it cuts out a big chunk of it, and that sent a message from agency to say, this is our default. If you're not going to share, it's on you to explain why, not on them to explain why they want it.
Yeah, that's a great working tip. I don't know how many times when we were working with partners, our attorneys got into rooms before any of us did, and it was dead before it started, right? So thank you for sharing that. Other questions? We have one right up here. Go, Celeste.
So I'm very interested in learning the balance that we need when we want to be transparent and accountable and share data, because data tells a story. Mm-hmm. And often we have so much data, we don't have time to look at all the stories, right? So we put our data out there, but other people who are interested in it have time to look at our stories, and it ends up on the front page. So what's the mindset that we need to adopt to take on the risk of being transparent and accountable and sharing data we haven't fully mined and don't fully understand and haven't fully analyzed?
So I'll speak to the open data effort we did in Health and Human Services, and that was a key concern of the agency level leadership. Exactly that, right? They're watching for front page stories, and we're essentially handing them out, right? And so what we said is, let us show you the value, right? And we started with the easy stuff. We didn't start by releasing, prisoner data, not ours, but we started by saying, here's enrollment data that's already public, but we put it out in PDFs in the middle of a 300-page document, right? No one can even find it, and those who do have to get a student intern to type it into their Excel spreadsheet for them, right? And so we said, let's start with that, because what we found, Russ made this point earlier, we had staff who were taking the time to collect this information, put it all together, format it, usually in an Excel spreadsheet, and then putting it into a PDF form, putting it into this document, and having that go out. And we said, stop it. Stop formatting it. Stop putting it into that. Just put it all together and put it out there and let people use it. So we started with the stuff that there was more of a level of comfort with, but knowing that people were going to find data quality issues, especially in Health and Human Services. We don't have any data points that only come from one place. They're all coming from all over the place. And we just got through a long series of conversations, leadership to buy into the fact that there is value in learning where your deficiencies are.
And I think that's the heart of it. And it is being willing to take that step, that risk. And frankly, the best example I can come up with actually isn't even my department. It's similar law enforcement organizations that wear body cams. And the policy in Sacramento County that changed in the last, I think, 6 months is that they'll make all body cam video available for an incident within, I think it's 30 days or 60 days or something along those lines. And they said all. That opens your closet and shows everybody your dirty laundry. And the reality is, out of thousands of hours of video, there will be one incident that is embarrassing, that is hard to swallow, and should never have happened. That's the world we live in. That's what happens in prison systems. That's what happens in healthcare systems. But I think being willing to take that step, and I will tell you, in my agency, we are scared to death of doing that because our funding is based on populations and incidents and a bunch of things. We have mechanical processes for determining how many staff we have and what type of events go on in a prison. Putting that out there for people to consume and formulate their own theories based on that, so that's a scary topic to us. And when you start talking about what happens because of an incident or what precipitated an incident or staff, it is a hard pill to swallow. So what do you share? I completely agree with Adam. You've got to take some small steps and start putting stuff out there. And the nugget is maybe somebody will come up with an approach or an idea or something that you hadn't thought of.
Yep.
And having that disinterested third party, disinterested might be the wrong word, somebody who's not directly related to you, somebody may come up with something that's completely different. We're talking with Lawrence Livermore Labs and some UC systems about how to handle contraband cell phones in prison or drones entering a prison. They're looking at it from a completely different perspective than we were. The example I used about looking at weather data with incidents, that wasn't one of our data scientists who sat in a dark room and came up with that. Frankly, that was essentially a student intern that said, what about a hot day? Wow, we've got 60,000 employees that hadn't come up with that in 30 years. And it's just sometimes you're too close. So it's being willing to take that risk, but it is a risk, and I will tell you, it's completely uncomfortable for me and everybody else that has those conversations, but I think it's the right thing to do.
And take your time. That open data conversation took a year, right, before executives moved from over my dead body to let's talk about it. Right. So. And
the reality is there are some things that won't be and shouldn't be shared publicly. I mean, obviously healthcare information, but there are other things that frankly, without the right context, you can't interpret them correctly. And it takes people, frankly, a lot smarter than me to figure out, how to use some of that data correctly. So not everything should be available to everyone all the time. But I think we often go to default too far on the other side of the spectrum of, nobody needs to see this but me. Well, if I can see educational data and how you're performing in a classroom within a prison, maybe that changes where I put you to live because you've demonstrated that you're a good student. Maybe you should be in a housing unit where it's more conducive for you to work on your education. In other words, to do homework. I might place you differently or put you in a different type of job because now I have access to something that didn't used to be shared.
Yeah, great information. Join me in thanking Russ and Adam for sharing their expertise with us today. We know that we didn't get to all of your questions, and that's specifically why we've set aside June 21st from 10 to 11:30 to take a deeper dive into some of the questions that you have around data initiatives, and around shepherding those projects for your agencies and departments. So we hope that you'll consider joining us. Again, on the back of your flyer, you have a QR code, a tiny URL, and still the manual option available for you to drop your questions in the box as you leave our session today. Just so you're aware, we have invited Scott Gregory, Lynette Scott, and Scott Chrisman, it'll be the Scott show, to join Adam and Russ. And I believe we have Scott Chrisman confirmed, and we're still waiting for responses from the other two individuals. So fingers crossed that they're available and free to join us on the 21st, and we hope that you will too. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. We hope that you've walked away with a few nuggets and maybe a recipe or two around how to manage your data and your data projects. Thank you again.